I'm going to call to order Woodstock Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for March 31st. I got whatever time, 7:32 to start. This is a hybrid meeting, so we are here in person, but we also have the Zoom capability, and Nancy Frazier told me she was not going to be able to attend. So we'll note that. I'll go through the roll call. Mark, do you mind starting us out? Jeff Gordon.
David Morse. Joe Fluick.
And we know that Delia and Amy are here. Ashley told me she's unable to attend tonight. We don't have anybody in the public in the room. We have somebody on Zoom. Could you please identify who you are so that way we can note things for our record? Whoever's listed. Can you hear us?
Should be able to, I'm not muted.
Yeah, but you'd have to unmute yourself if you can hear us to let us know who you are. I don't hear anything.
Leon Ingman.
Okay, thank you for identifying yourself. Welcome to the meeting. Designation of alternates, we need how many? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We need 2 and we have 1. So, Mr. Gould, you'll be seated. If you don't behave, we'll unseat you. Or if you get up and slap somebody, then, well, I guess you don't get booted out, do you? You get an Academy Award. Isn't it unclear whether they made a decision to ask him to leave, or it seems, I'm reading different stories, it seems unclear. I don't know. You know, I thought it was actually fake news or a fake video until indeed it was true, because I'm like, that would really happen, but evidently. But hey, you still get your Academy Award for. I did not watch the movie that he got the Academy Award for, but. Well, that's a different issue, I guess. I don't know what goes on there. So, but we can honestly say, speaking of that, did you actually see David Letterman's quote unquote news brief about it? So David Letterman with his beard and mustache is there with his longtime publicist saying, hey, thank you for having me on. I did host the Academy Awards once in like 1990 something, and nobody slapped anyone at that Academy Awards. And he said, that's all I have to say. All right, so we'll note that for the record that Dean, you're seated. So I'm going to note that here. All right, that takes us to the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Marcotte, do you mind doing the honors?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. My chair's report is very brief. Thank you to everybody and thank you to the staff for the work that gets done. Just to remind people, we technically have a meeting scheduled for the first Thursday, which is next week. Our usual business meeting is the third Thursday, which is the 21st. And we've also provisionally scheduled the last Thursday, if needed, for the 28th. So those are on the books. We're definitely having a meeting on the 21st, because I'm assuming we'll have business items to come before us. But we still have the 7th and the 28th that we've reserved as far as further work on the affordable housing plan. So just to let you know how that plays out in April for the time being, what we have. That takes us to the affordable housing plan. I know, Delia, you were able to get some things out to folks. I know that we weren't able to get it out a lot earlier because it took you, I know it took you time, Delia, to get everything put together and squared away, which I appreciate you doing. We do have copies here for folks, and we'll get copies to the folks, Delia, who aren't here.
Yes.
Commissioners. So we do have some stuff. Just for one point of clarification, I know when the last meeting we had the survey results, or it was the gap assessment, and there were some corrections and some numbers that needed to be done. I know that you had noted that some of it needs to be done
Yes.
I'm assuming those corrections are updated in here.
Yeah,
Okay. And certainly, we'll, if further things need to be updated or if for some reason there's anything, certainly that can be done. This is a draft,
yes,
so we're not gonna hold any typos against you, Delia.
thank you.
So, but I do like to have it in color, which is nice, and we actually have a nice little picture on the front. So, which is nice.
So nice.
Well, that's gonna be a big agenda item that we're gonna have to go into executive session about, I think, in a couple of, at our regular monthly business meeting to really once and for all square. the away. So, but we'll wait to the appropriate time to discuss that. Not mentioning any names, right, Mark? So, Delia, I'll turn it over to you as far as what you have. I know we've already spent time reviewing through a lot of data and stuff, so, I'll turn it over to you as far as whatever you wish to present. I know there's some new stuff in here as far as putting some things together as far as strengths and weaknesses and some of the things talk about as far as what we might want to do with affordable housing, which does touch upon things we've talked about before. We know we've wanted to get into, which is what we do with multifamily, what we do with even duplexes, what do we do about mixed use zoning? Some of that stuff we've been having discussions on and off over some years. Certainly it's appropriate to be bringing back up now. So I'll turn it over to you as far as where we go, and then certainly opening it up to the commission.
So I've drafted language to go for each section that's shown in the table of contents. And so we don't have to go over absolutely everything, but if you have comments, if you can get them to me by next week, then we could discuss them at the next meeting. For instance, the community values, that kind of thing. I thought we spent a little more time on the other stuff. I've presented several times now on what affordable housing is. If Mr. Engman has any questions though.
We recognize them at the
yes.
appropriate time.
So
We'll go ahead.
So this largely incorporates that stuff that was in the needs assessment. That was all the technical details, and this is written report or written information that incorporates pretty much all of that. I would think all of it.
Joe?
I think the detached is what we normally think of as a single family home, because it's not attached to anything else. And I think attached is like a townhome or townhouse, which I always thought was confusing because I thought of that as like a condo, but other places consider that to be a single family home that's attached to the next one, which I didn't think of it that way because I've never lived in a place that has those, I guess, but I had to use the same categories of information that's on the American Community Survey. Otherwise, the data doesn't work. Hopefully that's in my list. Is that, well, do you have the address? Which one are they? Do you have the name of it? Because I could tell you if it's on the list. Yeah, Fawn Ridge is on here. That's listed as a condominium.
So that will be listed under each one of those is a 1-unit attached.
It's a good question. I'd have to go into the American Community Survey and see where they put condos. Because you do have quite a few of them, so that's a good question.
And actually following up on Joe's question, perhaps we might want to have some type of clarification text as far as what is the definition then of 1-unit attached? What's the definition of 1-unit detached, multi-unit? Mobile home is obvious. So that way anybody reading this can say, okay, I understand what 1-unit attached. Maybe we can just have some type of clarification definition in there. Yeah, because it's interesting. 1-unit attached, I wouldn't have, that name wouldn't have rung the bell with me as far as for a condo.
I don't know. I think it also has to do with ownership, like an apartment around here anyway, you rent the apartment. In a place like New York City, people sometimes own their apartments. Right,
Yeah, sure.
or you can lease them, I suppose, from the owner.
So we'll clarify whatever those definitions are, we can just put in clarification text.
Yes.
Did you have anything else on that one, John?
So in your needs assessment, I don't think I had the chart about when the existing homes were built. And this is according to the American Community Survey. I don't think that the town, I mean, we do, the assessor does have that kind of record, but I'm not sure that it would be in a form that would be easily searched to group them into, you know, how many in this year and how many in that year. That would take a lot longer anyway, if it was accessible.
But not a surprise, we already knew this anyway. When the big housing bubble burst, that was a great recession, we certainly knew, we could certainly see what went on with the building
Yeah.
and how it really dropped.
Well, the year the chart that on page 10 that shows your existing homes are built, that wouldn't show you how many homes that might have been burned down or might have been torn down and replaced with another home. So I don't think you could add them all up and expect it to be the total of homes you have today. Because there could be homes that have torn down and maybe that lot have never been rebuilt, or maybe that lot was replaced with a new home on the same lot, but maybe may or may not be in the same place. So that, I don't think the total would equal the total you have today necessarily. I think this is just single family homes. But I can check. But I'm gonna check.
And we can, and yeah. Well, Dale, you can get clarification on that. Some clarification into here, so people about existing homes, what
Yeah.
that is. So.
And we have zoning, we have the zoning map. Oh,
It does fit.
that's
So
interesting.
evidently that
Good.
is single family houses, right? You have listed, Delia, single family
Good.
houses?
So I guess the ones that have been burned down, I don't know, they evaporate, I guess.
So you can then just list it here, years of existing homes, single family were built, so that way
Okay.
we know exactly what we mean by existing homes. Very fast math by Commissioner Adeletta. You get a gold star. Yeah, but these are just the ones that were.
Well, this goes back to 1939. So then on page 13, you have this map that showing up there. I tried to show the whole one so Mr. Engman can see it. Of course, at that scale, it's a little bit hard, but otherwise you can't see the whole thing. I wanted to get the total of the different kinds of homes. That's why the next page has the highlight. I asked the assessor and I didn't hear back from her until after I sent out the PDF because I wanted to get it to you as early as I could. So after she got back to me, I was able to search the vision data. And I was surprised to find quite a bit more. So you have that in front of you. And I can stop sharing this and put the other document up.
I'm just taking, a look. Some of what you have listed as condos, doesn't show in some of the areas.
I'll have to go back. I
Like
just
Pine
had the,
Ridge, that doesn't show.
I just had the map made today, so I'll have to go
Well,
back
maybe
and
it does.
ask
It's
the guy
actually
to
very, very
fix
small.
the map.
I see it's very small. Almost looks like a little spoon. I see. There it is, little smudge. Yep.
So when I went through the vision data, it's a little tricky because there's different columns. And some one column might have single family or multifamily or whatever, but some of them aren't listed that way in that column. They're listed as what they are in a different column. So you have to search in different ways, but that's how I found you have 22 two-family, 4 3-family. We knew about the 9 condos, 7 4-family, 11 properties that have 5 or more units. And then we knew about the 1 senior housing, and there's 8 mobile homes.
So this is the updated stuff you were able to get.
Right.
Okay.
And then the bigger table that you have in front of you. In just a moment, and I'll turn to that page for the audience. This only shows the 4 and higher. Otherwise, we go on for pages and pages. For dwelling, right, per property. So it shows you which ones have 4, 5, and higher numbers.
Hmm.
And hopefully I have them all now, but if you know of one in town that's not on the list, let me know and I'll add it. Well, right, that's why you have the other page that tells you how many. Right, but I don't want to list, for the same information, I want to list like 3,000 records that tell you what year each one was built. And because I thought we didn't have that many, I showed a picture of each one, thinking that you could derive some information, that if those are working out well, maybe you can write standards that sort of reflect that. So then the new development would go along the same lines as the ones that have already been built. Now that we have quite a few more, I don't know if you want me to include all of those or take them out. The pages in the document, the plan that has each multifamily, have a picture. I have a picture of the GIS map and I have a little table. I'd have to add in the ones that are missing because I found so many more. I mean, we can take all that out and just stick with this table if you want. I haven't counted, but the list got quite a bit longer.
Yeah. Good size number. A lot more stuff to the thing, which I think you're right on. Because want to have something for every single one on here.
So I don't know if you want to devote that much of your plan to that kind of thing.
I agree with Joe. I don't think we need every single one. I think we would just have to list, you know, if you're listing here like existing apartments. I think we would just have to say like examples of existing apartments or examples of examples of existing condos, that it's not pictures of every single one, because you'll have the table on page 16, which is basically what this is updating.
So would you leave all the ones in that are in there now, or just leave a couple and take the rest out?
I would agree. I don't think we need to double the number of pictures. Then you already have an asterisk about the sunshine house. Right. They can rebuild as what they had. So I think that's fine. I like having some of the pictures in because it does give you some nice visual of what there is. It is nice to see. So thank you for putting them in, Delia.
Sure.
So basically, it looks like there was quite more found on the vision map. So that's good to have an updated list. So based on my understanding is this list, Delia, is what is basically just going to replace this page 16 of the list, right?
Yeah. And this page here with the yellow highlight that's in the document that you have, it's gonna just be replaced with the table that now has the answers to the missing information.
Oh, okay, I understand. Yep. What page did you say it was, Joe?
14.
14? Oh, I see. Okay. So that's the update then. Okay. That makes sense. Thank you for getting the updated numbers. About the mobile, it's all in one area?
No,
Or they're just all different? It's not one grouping of these 8.
no,
I honestly don't know. But they're not all in one location.
then it's not a trailer park and it's not in one part of
Yeah.
town. Actually, that didn't come up because that, you mean, what do you mean? You can't actually, by zoning, you can't regulate the width of a house. So I don't believe you can make those illegal. I don't think that's the rule anymore. And the Solaire and the
There's still a big move. Some parts of the country very much where people buy, build the tiny homes, and sit on the trail. They can move. They're not always perfect. People do that. You know, definitely a growing business. So someone may decide I want a big house and whatever, but I can have like a tiny home, I guess is what they're called. And they'll fit on trailers and they can park. And then you can move them if you wanted and stuff. And there are people who do that stuff and they don't have to have like a big plot of land, or they may, not contract, but they may get some type of agreement with someone who has like a big field somewhere and say, hey, can I do this or whatever? So, it is a business out there for some people to do what they want to do.
you're not supposed to do that. Like, for instance, at campgrounds, they're only allowed to be open, I believe, like April 30th through November or something. I don't have the exact date off the top of my head. But elsewhere, you'd have to, I believe they're regulated by the trailer ordinance, which isn't in zoning, but it was always kind of given to the zoning officer to deal with. No, a trailer is like a camper trailer or an RV. And so mobile homes, because they're parked in one spot, and they're not in a foundation, but they're in a fixed location, those are not considered a trailer. I believe so. I'm gonna look that up for you because I don't believe that zoning can regulate the width of a house. I don't think you can prohibit them because they're long and narrow.
No, isn't it more if it meets building codes and any fire safety codes, and if it just otherwise meets what zoning says about what needs to be as far as its footprint. So if it meets all the setbacks and everything else and passes
Right.
public health, if someone
Far as
wants
I
a
know.
long, narrow house that's just only one room wide,
That's their business.
if it meets building and all the other codes and it meets the land codes we have, I don't think we would have any authority to say your house can't be any thinner than this or any wider than that, than whatever, other than what can fit on the land or what they want. That fits, is my understanding.
I believe so. And also in terms of someone asked about campgrounds, they're not in here. Because when I searched the assessor's records, they wouldn't come up as a single family or any of those categories because that's not what they are. And no one's supposed to be living there year round, except maybe one caretaker, I think. I can look them up, but I don't believe so.
So it was an ordinance, Steve?
Yes,
The name of the ordinance would be.
I thought it was trailer ordinance or something like that.
Yes, trailers. It is indeed. So it says here, adopted in 1972. That is true. It says here, and they even talk about recreational camping sites. It's an ordinance pertaining to trailers adopted in October 4th, 1972. It says to ensure safe and sanitary trailer housing and to promote the health, peace and welfare of the residents of the town. And it has various definitions, including what a recreational camping site is. And this was actually multiple updates, amended 87, amended 98. To include farm trailers, things like that. And it says here, the regulations of recreational campsites has to be licensed by the Board of Selectmen, inspected by the Health Office. It says here, so it says here, upon approval, a permit for a recreational campsite is for 1 year for a specific number of sites, and it shall be operational from April 1st to November 1st.
It's like a campground.
Well, that's what they talk about recreational.
That's what I'm saying,
campsites.
mobile
That
homes
gets
are not
more
considered trailers.
And then it says here, parking of dependent trailers. It says here if it's a dependent trailer, which a trailer which does not have a toilet, bathtub, or shower, or a trailer that has those that are not connected to a sewage system. And it says here that in this ordinance, a dependent trailer to be parked and occupied no more than 96 hours on a property, unless you get a permit to do more by the Board of Selectmen. However, you can't have it any more than 2 weeks with a second 2-week renewal. That's in the ordinance. And then an independent trailer is a trailer that has a toilet, bathtub, or shower, which is connected to a sewage system. There's like some lengthy wording on this. It says here, you got to get a permit for it and all sorts of stuff inspected. And it says here, there doesn't seem to be any limit to how long that could be.
I don't know if an independent trailer, maybe that would be a mobile
Well,
home, but I
then
don't,
they
I didn't
updated
think they
this.
were considered trailers.
They then updated the trailers 2 more times in 85 and 87. Wow, saying here that this ordinance does not apply to any trailer parked or placed prior to October 26, 1972. Then they turned around and said that farm trailers are exempted. And they said no more than 2 trailers or mobile homes will be permitted on any one
This mobile
farm.
home.
Yep. And then it said you have to comply with federal, state, and local health building codes. So it does get in here about talking about farm trailers or mobile homes. So it looks like they did a bunch of amendments over time on this, which is interesting. It's like a 4-page overall ordinance.
Might not be legal, but
It looks like there's a bunch of restrictions that are in place unless you're grandfathered in prior to October of 72, or it's farm, and then there's certain rules that you can be exempted from.
I'd like to include a section on ag housing and include what's in the ordinance pertaining to ag.
Well, we have notified the Ag Commission on more than one occasion that we are working on this, and that certainly we would want to hear from them. I've sent out another reminder to the Ag Commission tonight to let them know that we're working on this overall plan, and we would love to hear from them about some ag stuff, knowing that we have a deadline of getting this in by June 1st. So they can certainly, maybe it might be good, and we encourage this before for them to attend one of our meetings, so we can have that discussion in person. But I did send out an email tonight. It was for trailers, and I can let me see what it says about the definition of mobile home here. Let me see here, because this gets into trailer. Here it goes, trailer, coach, or mobile home. Mean any vehicle designed or constructed to permit its use upon the public streets or highways, and also as a dwelling or sleeping place occupied by one or more persons, whether it's a trailer, coach, or mobile home.
You can't drive a mobile home around
Why? Why can't you drive a mobile home?
because it doesn't have an engine.
You can pull it, put it on a,
Right, that's what I mean. You can pull it, but you can't drive it.
yeah.
You wouldn't take it.
There's a mobile home park in Canterbury and there's one in Killingly and probably some other towns. I don't know if they have new mobile homes, but I could reach out to them. But that's what a trailer park people live there. That's their home. Well, I'm gonna look up the
Well-
statute about limits, because I don't believe it allows you to limit the size of a home.
Well, technically, when they are talking about, when they amended this in 1998, and started getting into what they call, updating the trailer ordinance, it still matches with what they were talking about, trailer coaches, mobile homes, because they say in here in the term trailer will be used for brevity as designating trailer coach and mobile home interchangeably. So when they started talking in here about updating this in 98, and they started getting in here about what to do with independent trailers, meaning it's connected to a sewage system. They start getting in here saying that no one shall park a trailer in Woodstock except if you own the land. And it's going to be occupied by the owner. And then they get in here as far as all the rules to follow. A fine if you, a filing fee of $2. And then they get in here about the plot of land shall be no less than 1 acre. With no dimension on any street less than 150 feet. Have to park at 20 feet from any trailer property line. 50 feet from any public road. No less than 400 yards. Interesting. So it has to be at least 400 yards from any school, church, public library, fire station, other place of public assembly.
What's a trailer lot line?
Well, that's the property that's sitting on. And each trailer has to pass public health. You get a license from the Board of Selectmen. It's good for 1 year. It can be renewed. And granting this, and if you get an extension, Easily. And then if you take your trailer off its wheels and place it upon blocks or foundation, it will then become taxed as like a regular home would be taxed. And then there's a penalty. There's a fine if you don't abide by it, anywhere from $5 to $100 for each day. So evidently there are rules in here about what to do. So it looks like in 72, that's when they put this ordinance in and updated
I
it.
think that's just trailer burned. First selectman. Others.
But technically, this ordinance is still in effect with all its amendments. Maybe they haven't wanted to issue permits, licenses. Technically, this ordinance is still on the books. So, and there's actually stuff talking about if you wanted to use trailers, mobile homes for, as part of a designated farm. So that's actually already in here. That was, looks like that was updated in the 90s, 1998. There's stuff already in here about that. Mostly it's a number of exemptions. So there is already some stuff on the books about it. You'll find out some more info about that for us,
Yeah.
will you? Okay, I think our connection is lost. Okay. So we'll find out some more about that. So there must have been something that happened. The ordinance. They clearly put something in. So, okay, well. Let's see what we might be able to fix with it. We lost our Zoom connection.
That's on the internet, so they should still
Oh.
see what's in my computer.
So it's this,
You actually
okay.
can't see the screen. And I don't know what I'm doing, so turn it off, turn it back on again.
I think we really should, I mentioned this before, not here, but actually in other meetings, we really should get on a modern one that's easy to use and easy to connect.
This one looks newer than the one that I used to have tall people, where I had like a mile-long stick to cook it with.
Do you know, it'd be really nice, maybe if David Morris donates the new one like that, we can put a plaque on it. Donated by David Morris.
Well, now it's just blinking, it's nothing happening.
It's always been a finicky device, unfortunately. But we have paper copies there, and if we're able to have it on the screen, otherwise on Zoom, then we'll just move forward. We can all see the paper copy then, as long as you're able to share it on the screen.
Yep.
All right. All right.
I believe so. Now we're moved on to, do you have any more questions about the data, which we've gone on over in the past with the assessment need, the needs assessment? If I made a mistake in my math, please let me know. One friendly commission member already pointed out to me I made a mistake, sorry.
That's why this is a draft.
So let me know if I made a mistake, like on these increase, decrease, I found a mistake already. So if I made any more mistakes, let me know.
Joe, you had something?
They have the net value, I think is the 70%. I figured out what the 100% was. So that's the value that I used. Right.
Okay.
Where would I put that as a note at the bottom or?
Anyone have anything else when they? Or Delia gets into some of the stuff later on in some of the pages where we start going through. Some of this. Sure. Yep.
Are you on this page? Okay.
We're getting into daily about this Wyndham County, Connecticut, HUD Metro area.
Right, this is the table that you get when you go to look this up for our county. And I think the median family income is taking into account the median of all the families. And then they break it down by how big the families are on the right side of the table.
Yes.
I didn't make the table, so I don't know exactly how they came up with it, but I think they take, it's 80% of the median of the area median income. And then they I think it's the only table that I was able to find, so I'll have to see if you want to know what the area median income is, as opposed to the area of the median family income?
So you can check on that. Though.
Yep.
We can find out about the area median income and this median family income. That's the two terms. Okay. See, because I typed in about his area median income, the same as median family. It takes me to the HUD site, which is. Here we go. What is the difference between HUD's median family income and area median income? It says median family, and this is based upon HUD definitions, that the median family income annually for each metropolitan area and non-metropolitan county. And then, oh, here it is. That's That's what FMR is. So evidently, they then say that the HUD uses or whatever uses the term area median income is the term used more generally in the industry. So if the term area median income is used in an unqualified manner, this reference is synonymous with median family income, according to HUD. If it says here that if in some way the area median income is given some type of qualification or, further definition, then they're not the same. But evidently, if they just put in area median income and don't say anything more about it, then it's HUD views it synonymous in terminology as median family income. I'm not certain if that in this table, if they're using the two terms the same. But according to this Q&A from HUD, that's how they define both and how they use them. It's kind of interesting.
Can you email me a link to that? And then I can
Yeah.
share that with everybody?
This is from the website, so it may be that this area median income, if it's not further defined, might be median family income. I don't know. Excellent.
Turning things off and turning them back on and it doesn't work.
Well, it still would be nice.
Yep. Sure.
Yes. I think what you're gonna have to do is, you're right, you're probably gonna have to get into that for more detail to see exactly what the heck how they're coming up with it and how they're defining it. I bet you that link probably does. Because you're right, the numbers may not add up. It sounds like there's probably much more info that they're gonna be defining or saying. Mhm. Right, we can get some clarification, also see about the link. So I don't know what the link is, so we can get that deal, yeah, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. That's why I would lump them more into the attainable housing. Because if the lot size is smaller or if the house itself is smaller, I don't want to make any promises, but it's generally less expensive unless you're building with very high quality materials. But there's no limit for someone to rent it at a certain level. And the town has no involvement or control over it. So the only houses that count in that chart are the deed restricted or that particular type of mortgages that are listed, or the rental assistance programs. So and I contacted the Department of Housing that updates that list. And I said, what can we do to get more of those mortgages or get more of those vouchers or more of those rental assistance? And they said, there's nothing you can do. And so it's like, so we have to do this plan and the only thing we can do is deed restricted?
The legislature
that seems
this year
unlikely.
has been debating, at least in the committees, not out on the floor yet, about what to do with these definitions.
practically speaking, if you're gonna deed restrict a house in the fair yonder of Woodstock, how does it really help the person who lives there if they need to have a car and all that goes with having a car, because everything they need, you have to drive to get to it. And so I grew up poor, not as poor as it gets, but government cheese and peanut butter poor in a one-income household. And I don't need to go through the sub story, but we were pretty poor. And we chose, my father, I don't know if he got the land from my grandparents or what, but we chose to live in an area that there was no employment nearby. But I think that you should have the right to choose that. But if you're promoting that someone live there because you have this restriction, then you're limiting the person who lives there. Maybe they live there and they get to go through college or something. Do they have to leave because they now make more money? Like, I've never understood that. But if you're promoting that they live there and there's no jobs nearby, they can even walk to the store to save money on gas when they go to buy their groceries or something like that, you're putting them at a disadvantage, in my opinion.
Well, this is what has been brought up last year in the legislature. I had testified, and I've testified this year as well, that the 830G law is old and is clearly not meeting its mark. There's no question about it. Even the state recognizes it. The problem is, and that gets to what you mentioned, Joe, that the way the state's been approaching it is trying to force towns to do more of the affordable housing for the existing criteria. So one of the things I testified to was, in Woodstock, you could mandate that we build more, which is one of the laws still being, one of the bills being debated again this year. But is it really helpful for people where we don't have a walkable downtown to get to jobs? We don't have a lot of the jobs compared to maybe some suburbs do. We don't have that type of public transportation infrastructure. So is that really where people are going to want to go if they can't find a job or they can't get to the job if they can't afford a car? That's a real issue. What's been, not saying pushing back, but I'll use the term because that's what I testified to, is the way to really do it is don't put more mandates on the existing 830G law that towns really can't meet, or trying to meet what some of the proposals are is making higher density. So that way, instead of multiple of these affordable housing units scattered all around the town, try to put them all in very high density areas. Problem is, you still have to have infrastructure and jobs for that. Really look at what the meaning is, which is like also attainable, to try to make it more flexible, to give towns opportunities to try to meet some of these more realistic goals. And that's been what has been presented by a number of groups. I'm part of CG 169 Strong, which is an active group in this state, trying to say we are for affordable housing, but you really actually got to look what's truly affordable and what's truly attainable, not go by an existing law that is clearly noted to be out of date and needs to be updated. So maybe this year there'll be some of the bills might come out that might actually move that a bit more in that type of direction. In which case, then if they could allow some of these things that are more realistic to be considered affordable, then a town like Woodstock won't always get dinged by some people saying, well, you're never meeting your mark for affordable housing. And quite frankly, it's not really fully our fault if we don't have an infrastructure and job infrastructure to support some of this affordable housing, like maybe Fairfield does or Glastonbury does, although I don't know how much room Glastonbury does, but that's been what's been discussed in the housing committee, this legislation this year and last year. I'm hopeful that maybe the legislation will make it easier for more affordable, attainable housing to come about. Because quite frankly, I don't see how rural towns can meet some of those state mandates. But for attainable housing, the way you define some of it, Delia, those are realistic things that towns could do. Some towns already do it, but they don't get the credit for it.
Right. So unfortunately, I don't think there's a lot, unless your deed restricts some housing, and you could do that if you build some senior housing, they could count because they would be restricted to people who meet the criteria to live there. And so that could count towards your percentage. But there's lots of people who need a place to live and they're not all gonna meet that criteria.
Yet it could be attainable for them. But it wouldn't count as affordable the way the state views it. Right, yep.
We're talking about an affordable house.
It'd be a big leap if you were gonna get from 1.45% to 10%. Like if you were gonna do that in, I don't know, 1 year or something, but. So the town should do something. It's just, for instance,
That's what people have been testifying to. That's what I testified last year to the housing and planning and development police. That's what I testified again this year, which is you're using old rules in this 830G affordable housing law that even the state admits is outdated, but isn't updating them, but wanting the towns to adhere more to it and meet the criteria, which, I don't see how Woodstock could meet it with those rules, as you've mentioned. So a real push has been to tell the legislators, look, why force something in these old definitions? You need to look to see what is really more realistic. And some of the testimony that's been provided from folks in some towns actually said, hey, if you broaden some of the definition that in the real world is helping affordability, look at what some of these towns' percentages would be. It's kind of difficult to do that town by town, but clearly, when you look at it, if you broaden some of that, Woodstock's percentage would go up, which is actually helpful for people. So, unfortunately, when they have these public hearings, they only do it for 24 hours and they stop. So, but that's what I've testified to, and actually, there's been this group in this Connecticut 169 talk, which has been very active to say, don't keep pounding a square peg in a round hole. Why don't you actually redefine what the hole is and what the peg is? Because a lot of towns will actually be then meeting what the state would like. So we'll see if that goes this year. It's a short session this year. But I don't know if that's what they're going to do. They seem to want to really push more the real high density housing, which is supposed to be designed to be around where the jobs are and the transportation is. The problem is, our real estate doesn't have that kind of setup. Whereas if you're along the South Shore where they have all the rail stations, they could. The other way, which is interesting, that one of the ways they're trying to expand affordable housing is right now a housing authority in a town or city would get permission from a neighboring to build a housing unit that's run by the other town if the other town gives permission. So Putnam could say, we need more space for our housing authority. We want to expand it. We don't have space in town. Woodstock, you do, will come into an agreement and work out an agreement. And if Woodstock agrees to that and signs a contract, it could then have to come through us in a sense to be approved. But the town in Woodstock has already signed on. One of the bills that is being pushed and made it out of committee is one of the ways that some of the legislators see what affordable housing would be is take the senior housing, take the housing authority, you no longer have to ask the other town for permission. Now they're saying, you can just submit an application. So one town says, Putnam can say, hey, we want to put some more of our housing authority into Woodstock. We don't have to ask Woodstock's permission. We'll just submit to the planning and zoning, and it falls all under those housing laws where the planning and zoning commission doesn't have much say. And there's been pushback against that, saying, but is that really what's considered affordable in communities?
Well, if you,
Mhm.
I don't know if you've read through the whole document, but when you get to the part where page 58, needs of the community concerns, I understand that's the survey.
Page, you're talking about some of the things that limit what you might be.
Yeah, I wrote about how
52,
you have
roadblocks.
difficulties. Right, so I talk about how you don't have the kind of infrastructure that might exist in other towns that could support higher density development. And the challenge that even if you were to create these deed restricted housing units or somehow promoted mortgages, which I don't know how, like they said, we couldn't do that, but somehow if that were to happen, you still have a high cost of living compared to somewhere else because you have to drive to everything, to work, to go grocery shopping, to the doctor, to the school, to the post office, everything you need to do that you can't do at home, you have to drive to. And that's a huge expense. So if you were interested in that, you could put that in about how you might be open to doing something like that. Personally, I think to have an effective plan, you shouldn't be a one subject plan. If Woodstock wants to be farm friendly, you still want to have a lot of farms. You can't do that if you turn that land into house lots. But at the same time, Putnam, it's awfully hard to farm a parking lot. So it would make sense to put the land use in the place where it makes sense for it to function. So I think to have a good plan, you shouldn't have a plan focused on one subject. We shouldn't just do housing plans. We shouldn't just do agricultural plans. We shouldn't just do transportation plans. Each thing is really related to all the other things. Unfortunately, the state didn't give us a plan to do that. They said, write a housing plan. But that's why I want to include in here, I wrote something about agriculture.
Mhm.
I included that in there, and they might not want to hear it, but that's the truth.
They need to hear it because last year there was a lot of testimony about. You're right, they've been focusing only on affordable housing and not looking at all the pieces of it. For example, one of the things that keeps on being pushed by the legislature, and it's being pushed again this time, is that why are you talking about wanting to really push towns to put in these high density affordable housing units? Try to get them in places where you're saying it will be helpful to do, because then all the people who live there can all have ready access in one area to jobs, and they can walk to wherever, and the stores and the transportation. It was pointed out that there's big chunks of this state that, number one, the rail system doesn't run through like that, or the bus system coming from Hartford doesn't do that. How is that really applying to like Northwest Connecticut or Eastern Connecticut? It doesn't yet. It's become a one size fits all approach. And so what's been presented back to them is maybe that works in places like, where the commuter rail runs through and you have tons of businesses and things like that that you can walk to, you get to the rail station, type of thing. But why do you should come up with something different for places like where we are, where you gonna be walking to a bus station or a rail station or walk to your grocery store. You're right, you're gonna be having to drive a bit, which is an expense. So realistically, to me, that gets back to when we're talking about attainability, separate from what the state says for affordability.
So, and hopefully the state's gonna change its definition and encourage some of these things that can be done to make it more attainable. We'll see if they listen this year, but there's been a growing concert about that, but there's also been an equal pushback from some groups that think it should all really be high density. And that the cities are being unfairly burdened with affordable housing, because the towns aren't living up to their share of affordable housing. But I don't know how, again, how Woodstock can meet that 10%, given the state criteria. It's actually impossible to do, but I think it's good that you put in identify some of the roadblocks, which I think is helpful so people understand that there's transportation issues you got to think about, and job issues and the economic issues, other than just simply affordable housing. So I like that you put something like that in there. So,
Under opportunities, I wanted to add that you can consider mobile homes, which I'm gonna check, because I don't think you can actually prohibit them, but you could list them as, because they're not a use, so it's not like your permitted use says single family homes only, because that's not a use, that's a type of structure. But you could, I don't know, maybe you could mention it somewhere to make it clear that they're allowed, if you wanted to do that. They would be more affordable than many other homes, which are larger. And where I talk about the multifamily standards, right now you require the special permit. Your standards are awfully high. You require the 10 acres, huge setbacks. You have a standard that actually makes no sense, where you require the multifamily structure on the property to be 75 feet from I'm sorry, it's a distance between the house on the next lot and the multifamily house. Now, if the house on that lot has already been built, they're only required to be 20 feet away from the boundary line. So then that would probably change where you're allowed to put your multifamily house. But if you're next to a lot that doesn't have a house, then you would get to put it closer to the boundary line. And then when the person builds their house to where they're allowed to build it, now your multifamily becomes not in compliance. So you shouldn't have a rule. You shouldn't have a rule where that kind of thing doesn't make any sense. Your setback should go to your boundary line, not to something on the next lot.
but we know that this multifamily,
And
we
also,
identify it as something we need to update. In fact, don't we also have multifamily that if it's built, we still have that provision that says 50% set
is
aside, which technically I
completely
think is.
not supported in statute.
Yeah,
That's not
didn't you
even
point that out
allowed.
that it's
I did.
technically not allowed?
Right,
Statute prohibits it being done for multifamily, so.
because
that
they
provision
only
has
allow
been-
you to require open space in a subdivision, and then it's up to the town to determine
Mhm.
what that requirement is. And in Woodstock at the time was 50%. You've since changed your subdivision regs, but your multifamily still requires 50% open space. And there's nothing in statute that allows you to do that.
And I thought when we asked it, many years ago, we asked that for the annual legal training sessions, and I thought the reply was, that's correct. Statute does not support that for multifamily.
Right.
I thought. There's no, I think.
You
it-
don't have the authority to
There's no
require.
authority granted to do
You
that.
can't
for
do something if you
multifamily.
don't have the authority to do it.
We've never changed the wording because we were told it was moot wording anyway. But we've identified that we need to make certain we update multifamily. It's been on our strategic plan. So this will be an opportunity for us to really look more into it, because I know whenever it's come up, and we don't get tons of multifamily stuff. The last multifamily one we had was different. That was a single family compound.
It's
It was
a,
a different type of
it's
thing.
a duplex. And the only reason why they needed the special permit was because of the duplex.
Right.
They haven't built it yet, but as far as I know, was approved to have a duplex plus an accessory apartment, which in town, you're allowed to have your single family home plus the accessory apartment. So that's not what needed the special permit. The fact that it was a duplex with the accessory apartment was what made them require the special permit. The difference is that's not intended to be rental housing. That's the family who applied for it. They want their parents to live in the other side of the duplex, and a caregiver would live in the apartment to take care of either all or some of the residents who would live on the site, the family member who lives in the duplex, or, I mean, I don't know who would need it because the people who wanted to build were intending that to be their retirement home. But their parents, they were hoping would live in the other side of the duplex. So it's not rental housing. That's not the kind of housing this plan was intended to address.
Right, and that was my point was, even though we dealt with that permit, it's really not what this was. In
Right.
fact, the 2 points about revisions to what to do about updating multifamily regulations and also mixed use, those are 2 things we flagged in our strategic plan that we wanted to get to. And I think this is, this plan that we're dealing with it now will be a good springboard for us to really look into what to do to update those, as opposed to just keeping it on the strategic plan. We don't have to put those changes in the regs specifically in here, but you've identified some things that we should look at. And these are things we've talked about from time to time when it's been flagged. So I would say that this would be, those 2 items would certainly be, in a sense, I know we're going to be dealing with picking back up ag issues, but still, I think those are 2 good things that we should say, just like you, Delia, why don't we take a look in more depth, not in this plan, but as an action plan moving forward, really look at the details of what our regulations say about those 2 topics and what exactly is it that we really want to achieve and what would be the changes potentially to propose. Because this would be a time then for us to, not to put that detail into this plan, because we have until June 1st to submit it, but we can continue to do some work in that regard after we submit this plan. So those might be 2, I think those are 2 good action plans for us to finally move forward on, as opposed to just keeping it on the
I
list.
think if the standards were changed, that could be a perfect opportunity to
Mhm.
have some attainable housing. Now, if you were to deed restrict those units, so they would be available to people who meet certain income or criteria, they would count towards your percentage. But even if you didn't, it would create more attainable housing. Right now, at 10 acres and these huge setbacks, it's never gonna happen because that makes it so expensive. The benefit to multifamily is that it's sort of like you can divide the cost by the unit. So the cost of your lot is shared amongst those units. But when you have 10 acres and then you're effectively taking your 10 acres and shrinking what you're allowed to do with it with all your huge setbacks.
So why don't I ask this of the commission then? If we're gonna, and again, we haven't approved this draft, this draft yet, it's still a draft, but if we were to have things in there that Delia's identified as opportunities here, and I think those are good opportunities about what to do with multifamily, what to do with mixed use. If we were to say that those are opportunities, would we want to then have you, Delia, at some point, not like 10 years from now, but start looking more into the specifics of the regs that we have and flagging what are the things that you feel are not working, actually the actual wording of the regs,
Sure.
and what you think would be potential things that might need to be changed, or something that clearly we either don't have authority to do, or something that we've missed. And then moving forward, we're then actually acting upon these goals we that at some point can be something that can be brought back to the commission to discuss further and look into further. Mhm. So you're saying for us to better define what attainable housing is?
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Is that something that you think we could better flesh out for a definition?
Yeah, it would take some work, but we'll see what we can do. I think something should be in there.
Okay. That's a good point, because we're using the term attainable housing, but we should better define what we think it is. I think that's a good point, that we can certainly see what we can flesh out, more about what we think attainable housing is and have some type of definition to say how that drives some of these goals. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yep. Because again, I think there's a clear distinction as far as what we understand in general about attainable versus affordable. But I think the average person who may not spend their time dealing with planning and zoning stuff like we do, what we talk about, what they view as affordable versus attainable, may all be just kind of one thing. What's overall what they can afford, not like what the state says. They may, I don't expect that they would know the state criteria. I have to look up the state criteria. They're so specific. You can't, so that's a good point. So why don't we see what you might be able to flesh out for that, Delia?
Okay,
Sure.
yes.
I just want to see if
I believe that's what they were thinking because they 20% was left aside for roads and driveways. So I think they have this computer program that you put in your information and it evaluates your lots and spits out the number.
this scenario.
Most likely.
Yes. And that's a good point, because I remember when we had the build out analysis, yes, it would be assuming that you would have open land right now, not built on farmland that would sell, that would be built upon. And indeed, and I remember when they started showing, what's his name, who did that for us from the
Jim Larkin.
Jim Larkin, we had it up on the screen and he would show some of the stuff saying, this is how it would start to develop out to get to that. 80%, it wasn't like suddenly boom, one slide. It was kind of like a little movie showing how things would kind of pop up through town. You could see that there were clearly areas that didn't have houses on it, that clearly were farms and whatever that would be. It assumes that that stuff would sell to a developer.
There are
Absolutely.
maps that go with these if you want me to include the maps for each scenario.
We do have that from the build up analysis.
Right, do you want me to include those?
Why don't you do that? That'll be good. And that was discussed at the public hearings legislature, because that was brought up saying it's easy, some of the groups that were pushing this would just show maps of towns. But they really weren't taking into account what is really land that you could use. So if there's land you can't do anything with, you're right, it shrinks the existing land, which means if you're gonna then try to meet all these numbers for what some people want for affordable housing increases, what it does is it raises the density. You're gonna have to put a lot more on the remaining land. Very much so. So you,
When the legislation was proposed last year, I looked at it and they were proposing basically a one size fits all approach.
well, that's what they're
They
doing.
were
again this
saying
year.
4 units per lot that they wanted, right, they wanted certain things like a unit with 4 houses to just be approved with a zoning permit, nothing else, to just go anywhere. But we don't have sewers like that.
Well, that's what I've been opposing, is these one size fits all rules that are making it clear policy to people. I'm not opposed to affordable housing, but it's not as if each town is the same. So for example, you're right. So there's been groups saying, well, it should be as of right. So if you want to put in a multifamily home, you want to do that in Fairfield versus New Haven versus Woodstock versus Groton, it should be automatically as right. But that doesn't take into account what is actually the makeup of the town as far as how that fits. Or to say, it's called Fair Share, which is a group that came up last year with proposals to say what each town and city should come up with. Their take is the way they're pushing their legislation, they're doing it this year, is they say, number one, the cities are being burdened by the towns because the towns are not shouldering their fair share. It's not true, but what they're saying is a town like Woodstock has 1 point something%. Well, clearly then they're doing something wrong because they're not meeting the state goal of 10. They're not looking to see why we don't meet the 10. They're just saying you don't meet the 10, therefore the affordable housing that you should have to make up to the 10% goal, you're then forcing the cities to do it. But it happens to be where a lot of people then are living because there's a lot more jobs, public transportation. You can walk to certain things if you want. It's very, very different. So to say that, Woodstock has to meet, I forget how many hundreds their calculation was. Part of the legislation last year, it's a little less this year, but still is if you don't meet your fair share, you're going to be penalized, which means the town has to pay money. That is taxpayer money. That money, interestingly, will go into a fund. Guess where that money gets parked out to? The cities. So some people have been saying, well, is this a back room tax on the towns to fund things for the cities? Why don't you, encourage and support towns like Woodstock to try to meet meaningful affordable housing, which you call attainable, as opposed to just kind of forcing it the way the one size fits all is. So. Well, there's been some regional type things. There's been some of that discussion in the legislature to say maybe it should just be regional. The whole region needs to meet it and how the region decides. One of the problems then is it becomes, a town like Woodstock, if all the other towns say in a region, agree one way and Woodstock doesn't like it, Woodstock could be outvoted and then have to go by the rule. It may work in Wyndham, but it may not work here, for example. It's very interesting discussions and what has been proposed. One of the things I identified too is don't monkey around with this old affordable housing. Why don't you actually stop making new rules and why don't you actually really assess what is going on in the different areas of the state? And you actually find that perhaps you get a lot of good ideas and see what places are really doing to really help quote unquote affordability as opposed to the state criteria, because you're right, unfortunately, those definitions, Delia, are very strict. The way the state defines it, you're very, I think we're very limited here in how we could foster more for those definitions. What do you mean the way that?
Which rule? The 10%, it's based on the municipality, so it doesn't matter how big the town is. They want all towns to have 10%. So Putnam's a lot smaller than, no, it's just 10% of the number of homes that you have. And so that's the problem that I have with single issue planning. When I was started as a planner, the topic that was always being discussed was conservation. We have to have conservation subdivisions. We have to protect the wildlife, the environment. I'm all for that. I have a degree in environmental science, but we spent so much time talking about that. We didn't talk about affordable housing. We didn't talk about transportation. We didn't talk about active agriculture. We didn't talk about anything else. It was all conservation. And now, and probably not so much at the town level, but now that I work at the region level, we talk all the time about transportation. And now because housing is a big topic, there's like all these separate conversations. But where's the housing going to go? How are you going to get to the housing? How's the person who lives in the housing going to pay for it? They're going to have to use roads. They're going to need jobs. So there's the economy, there's transportation, all this stuff is all together. And if you spread all the housing out, you'll impact the water quality and the habitat. So it's all rolled in together. We're going to shoot ourselves in the foot if we focus on one subject. And when we're done with our housing plans and pat ourselves on the back, we did that, check that off, move on to something else. Oh, well, now we have to fix this problem, but this problem requires the adjustment to that plan. Instead of adjusting all the separate plans, we should be making sense of it together. So I fear that, I love that we had a lot of people respond in the survey, but we did have a number of people who were very negative, who didn't want to have affordable housing. They felt it either wasn't needed here, or there were comments like, it should go in Putnam. We don't want Woodstock to become like Putnam. Well, I don't think that my discussion of recognizing the fact that someone with limited means, who would be the people who live in the affordable housing units, have also to bear that burden of the transportation to get to all the places they need their job and everything. It's not a free pass to not have to do something about affordable housing, because then Woodstock gets to keep their views. I think it's more important that you think about, if you want to be a farm town, you have to have land and farming, and people need to be farmers. But you can't do the same thing and turn all the land into housing. So we need to, somehow you have to prioritize. So I think you do have to do something to encourage affordable housing, but maybe not to the extent that the state is, or some people at the state are pushing, if you're going to still be a farm town.
And those are main points that have been brought up to the legislative panels. Very much so. One of the problems I always find with the legislature, they focus on an issue. It's the timely issue. Then they do something, then they just move on to something else. They don't go back to it or fund these projects that need to be done. And then they don't. And it's interesting because when you see the way they've been doing it, this legislative cycle and the last cycle, last year was a long session, so to speak. They broke things up into different committees, and the different committees didn't fully dovetail stuff. Now, some of it, they moved it into different committees because it seemed to be very confusing how they were doing it. Certain things that should have been in housing and planning development ended up in other committees. But, you have a transportation committee, you have a housing committee, you have a planning development, you have an economic development committee. Some of these things that were being discussed in these different public hearings is almost as if they were complete separate silos. They were talking, say, in a housing committee about something and having one thing during a public hearing. But yet when you listen and participate in on the planning and development committee, they're talking in general about the same thing, but then they're coming up with completely different things and they don't dovetail, which is sad. And I agree with you, Delia. It's fine to have a housing plan. I think think we do a good job trying to look at different angles of things.
And when I was talking about not giving the free pass, I also think that that means that farmland has to be farmland. It's not a large lawn. So all of your PDR properties that are purchased and then not farmed, you're missing the opportunity to keep that in farming. And unfortunately, people who can afford to buy it, but then they don't actually farm it. And I'm not saying that hay is not farm land, but a lawn is not farm.
But there are some people who
So-
have fields that they want to keep open and not develop, not so much for farming per se, but because it's a habitat corridor, it connects to a
Yeah,
big
that's-
wooded area.
that's
And that's
fine too.
appropriate too, or it's buffering a natural resource, like a bunch of streams or a
I
big
was
water
just
body.
referring to the input that we received where people
Right.
were feeling like, oh, we don't need that. That needs to go, basically somewhere else, not in my backyard. This isn't a free pass to not have to do something about it, just because it would be expensive for someone to live in Woodstock. So you should do something. It's just, I don't think all kinds of housing that would meet the definition of affordable is appropriate here.
Mhm.
So when I write that section on agriculture for housing, right now, all I have to go by is what's in the trailer ordinance. So can you, is there some information farms can give me on what, I know they're private and everything, but what can we include in here? How many units do they need and how many, like, what would be a reasonable amount of housing units that the farms in town, whether maybe they don't all have to live on that farm. Maybe they live generally in town and they just work for a farm, but how many housing units would they need for the employees that they need? And are they seasonal or are they year round? If we can get some of that information, I could include it, because right now I don't know that.
That would be helpful. And also, again, once again, even today, reminded the Ag Commission that we are having these meetings. That we have limited time heading into June 1st to be able to submit something, but it doesn't mean the work ends. So if we can certainly be continuing to deal with things over time. If we need to do further updates. So, I think it'll be great to see if the Ag Commission can attend one of our meetings, because that way we're all together. We've even been encouraging that, and even encouraging other commissions like Conservation Commission to really see them at our meetings anymore. Because it's always good then in person. I've always wanted to see what we can do to continue to encourage that liaison amongst our commissions. But we reached out again to the Ag Commission, so yeah, but we'll reach out again to the Ag Commission. So hopefully the Ag, some of them can attend one of our meetings soon, and we can have some of this back and forth. Did you have something, Joe?
Yeah. I would like to see this paragraph E expanded
Which page are you on? I don't
on
know.
page 53.
53. Uh-huh.
The infrastructure in particular. And this could help us with our defense against the state. Should they say you're not doing enough to get to 10%. I think if they really understood our infrastructure, that would help defend us in being able to say we can't get 10%. In particular, I'd like to see, state how many public water lines.
None.
Where's our public water line? Where's our public sewer line? Where's our public transportation? So be specific, try to expand on that as much as possible. So that if somebody in Hartford asks us, we can just say, look at that paragraph, look at what we have for infrastructure versus you. See what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Yes, and actually, that's good to say, because a lot of these folks one of the points I kind of jokingly said at one of the public hearings, but I was serious about it, was all these folks making decisions, you know, and talking about all the towns, not a single one of them on some of these legislative committees. Some of them don't live necessarily east of the river
Right.
and know what really it is in the town. It's like, I think, all right, I think it's good to say, hey, public water. Well, we don't have public water. Public sewer, we have a small little one, right? That we can show the map, but we actually have what, a sewer avoidance policy?
Right.
It is very specific. So technically.
I'm gonna
you
show
say
the
this is
map.
sewer. I think that's good to say we have a sewer avoidance.
Their response would be,
And
well,
we will.
expand it, except I'd have to check with Putnam, because if you were to expand it, you also have to make sure your receiving facility can handle it,
Well,
an
that's one of the
expanded
reasons
service. So,
WPCA is very careful. So. Yeah.
And furthermore, we really don't have a location to put a sewage treatment plant. We don't have a stream that we can dump it into that's big enough to dilute it. We don't have a major river in the town.
yeah, I know.
Well, and I think also about infrastructure as well. I think it's important to highlight that. Look, I know the NECOG bus comes through, but it's not as if we have bus stops everywhere for it. We don't have that type of infrastructure for the public. We don't have a rail system for that. We don't have that type. NECOG bus is helpful, but it's not like the bus network you have in like Hartford or. But we don't have a transportation oriented district, which is one of the things that some legislatures are looking at to say we should be putting affordable housing in all the places for transportation oriented districts, TODs. Now, there are places along the rail lines that have those. Absolutely, they do. They really can't be built much because they're already overbuilt. But like a place for us, where is our transportation oriented district? We do not have one. We don't have a central transportation hub. So right there, you're right, that's a point for the health state, which is we don't have that. So how are we supposed to then cluster affordable housing around it that you want us to do when we don't even have it? You know, type of thing. The other thing I think could be also for infrastructure, and you identified this about roadblocks, but I think infrastructure also, you know, as opposed to just the hard stuff, is also, when you're talking about walkability, it's one thing to say people can walk around with stuff, but are you going to be able to walk to a transportation area? If you're off in Westwood stuff, you're going to be able to walk to town hall to pick up the VCOG bus. What jobs are you going to be able to do if you can't afford a car or you want to ride your bike to, especially when we're talking winter? You know, here. So I think those are also things that we can expand upon as far as our infrastructure assessment, what are our limitations. But also getting to what you said, Delia, people in town aren't going to want to suddenly want to start building public water infrastructure or sewer all over the place, or, you know, a big gigantic public transportation network that I don't think that's really.
Yeah, I think it is important to talk to the Putnam sewage treatment plant and see how much more they can take. If any.
They couldn't take more. That's been a
I
big
don't
issue
know.
with Woodstock, why the WPCA is very careful about monitoring what gets dumped in because of what Putnam tells them they're really allowed and they don't want, I thought. Absolutely.
And the same way with water. If we hooked into the public water supply.
That'd be a big infrastructure build out.
Yeah.
For a town that's what, 60 something,
Need another reservoir.
well, a town that's 60 something square miles, about that type of network. That's huge. We're the second largest geographically sized town in the state. Yeah, but those are all good points because the state, and I've highlighted this as best as I could in my testimony, the state doesn't look at that. At least the way the legislators are looking at it, they're trying to say, well, it should all work the same because it's easy to write the law that way. You just write the law saying, here are the rules, you all now have to follow it. That's the easy way. That's not the meaningful, effective, real world way to do it.
Yeah.
But we can certainly expand that, Delia, that section. Pool extension. I think that's a good point to say. You know, some of this is not our fault. but we're understanding of our limitations. I think anybody has to be realistic of what you can and cannot do.
I'm going to, yeah.
And actually, we could probably get some data from the department. Like every year publishes of what is the economic impact of ag in the state. Right. I like it. Yeah. I saw the- yeah. And actually, we can easily get that from the Department of Ag. They have all those data that we can say, hey. Ag does have
From
an economic
USDA,
impact.
where
No, the Department of Ag, the state.
I asked for that data and the assessor doesn't have that, but the agricultural commission sent me something, but it's not complete. It kept saying not in NECOG, and I was like, what are you talking about? And so I asked them that, and I think they said it didn't show up as farmland in their GIS map or something, but at least it's something to go on. So I'm gonna go back to that table and see what it has. And if I can get an idea of, is there a way I can get a list of what are the things that the farms in town produce? Well, who is FSA?
I'm sure.
Do you have a website or something? Can you give me one?
Please.
Let me, I think that's helpful to get these on that. At least we'll be able to get some data. I mean, it may not be 100%. We have an action list for Delia.
Yeah,
So one thing I just want to make certain, well, we have one member of the public on, so I just want to ask, Mr. Hagman, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have any questions or comments for us? You're not required to, we're happy you're attending, but want to make certain we give an opportunity to members of the public.
Oh, I'm just joining the conversation and wanted to kind of come alongside and kind of get on the learning curve here. So this has been very informative, so I appreciate it.
Good. Well, any member of the public is always welcome to attend our meetings. We always make certain we inform the public about what you're doing. So thank you for taking the time tonight. These are very important issues and we do take a lot of due diligence with it. So thank you.
All right.
So what actually talking about Delia's growing action list. And mindful of the fact that we have to at least get something, something to the state by June 1st. We don't want to be meeting the very end of May, like one day before. What do we feel about our meeting next week? Our meeting next week on the 7th is our meeting designed just to talk on this topic. Let me ask two questions. One is, Delia, do you feel with all these different things that this is going to give you enough time to flesh some more of this out and get some stuff out to us? Not saying you're late getting it to us, but it's a lot of work, I know. Our meeting is in literally 7 days. I
Not
want to make certain we.
Sure
give
that I
you time.
can. I have a meeting on Monday, so I have to spend tomorrow and Monday getting ready for that meeting. So I don't know how much I'll be able to get to you in advance of the next meeting.
Because one of the issues is also, if we see things, say, the night before the day of the meeting, I want to make certain we have enough time to review it. So do we want to see then, can we realistically do something on this for our meeting next week? Or do we want to say we would take this up, which is already going to be on, already drafted, the agenda for our monthly business meeting on the 21st? Do we, it's on the agenda, so do we want to say that would be our next meeting on this to give Delia time to do some of this, get some more of this info, put in some of this stuff? And then enough time then for us to have a heads up to be able to review it. I open it up. I mean, we've heard from you that, right. I'm sure just cater to our whims, right?
So I think a week is really ridiculous to try to get this just whether.
I can try to write up my notes for you and then.
So then it sounds like then for Delia to have a chance to get some of this done and then us to be able to see it before we show up at a meeting and really work through this. And that would then be the meeting on the 21st. We already have another meeting on the 28th that we can decide what to do with. That would mean if we're going to do the meeting on the 21st, that's anyway, we have to not having the meeting on the 7th, which is next week. Right now, no, there are applications that aren't big potentially if they get submitted. And if we get something from Treehouse, which I'm always told behind the scenes, it may come this month. But that would be a public hearing that all we do is have to schedule a public hearing and that takes us a minute and then, whatever. So right now, the way that I have I usually have for our regular monthly meetings, I have kind of a working meeting agenda set up for the year. It's kind of a draft to keep track of what maybe when. So right now, we would have enough time to bring this up because we have no pending public hearings. We have nothing else that we tabled. So right now, it looks likely, depending upon what may come through in the next couple of weeks, that we may not have a huge amount of stuff. And a couple of bigger items that might be subdivision items, I am told so far, likely not being submitted to us for April. But that can change. So right now, we would have, yes. So do we want to? It does not right now look to be busy at all, and quite frankly, we have the 21st. We also provisionally have the 28th reserved. Right now, it should. Do we want to say then set the target for the meeting on the 21st? And not have the meeting on the 7th, just next week? I do because I have to then submit a cancellation notice. That was you. So motion made by David Moore, second by Mark Blackner to cancel this. It's technically a special meeting of the commission on April 7. Any discussion? Actually, technically, we don't have any commissioners on Zoom, so I don't have to go through a roll, actually. So all in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? So I will send, I'll send a notice in probably tomorrow, but they won't receive it until Monday, that we'll cancel the 7th. And we'll certainly also let the public know about that, and then we will take this back up on the 21st, and then when do you think, Delia, kind of looking at your time frame, you might be able to get something out to us in time? Would you think, well, the meeting packet goes out kind of a week before, so the meeting packet's gonna go out in 2 weeks. But do you think,
I'll try to have it by the 14th.
if not, do you think you could, at the latest, get something out to us early that week of our commission meeting?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
so my kids have school vacation that week, but I'm not planning on going on vacation, but I might take a day or two.
Heaven forbid.
But I'll try to get it to you by the 14th.
You certainly want to take your vacation. My employer reminded me that I didn't take anywhere near my vacation time that's allotted for the past 2 years, and I've accumulated so much. I could probably just take it all and not show up for work for like another 6 months or something like that. I told them I wouldn't do that. So, okay, so then we can go accordingly. So, I assume people like the idea that in addition, I know Delia emailed us out about getting paper copies of this. Good. Thank you for doing that, Delia.
Sure.
Because it is helpful also to take notes. So that actually done,
What?
what can you do? So, so the next agenda item is adjournment, Mr. Young. So motion by Young, second by Buckner to adjourn the meeting. All in favor? Anybody opposed or abstaining? That so passes at, what do I have, 9:25? Thank you, everybody. Thank you.